Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am here for my MSI Upper Bracket Finals overview and analysis. Incredibly excited to get into this one. This really is the matchup at this tournament that I think we were all most looking forward to. This is a matchup between arguably the two single best teams in the entire world right now, and so I'm incredibly excited to go over what ended up happening. Spoiler alert, it definitely did not disappoint, but let me know what you guys thought of the series down in the comment section below. What did you think going into it, and did it live up to your expectations? Of course, if you want to know my thoughts on this series and on all the teams as a whole, you can check out any of the videos listed up in the iCard right now. Up there is going to be a playlist linked to every single MSI video that I've posted over the course of this tournament so far, which is about every single day. I also have a full bracket prediction for the bracket stage, as well as a primer video that I did at the beginning of the tournament that goes into depth onto all of these teams, their play styles, advantages, disadvantages. You can check any of those out if you want more context onto the series that I'm going to talk about today, but I'm incredibly excited to get right into it, so let's not waste too much time. Let's jump right in. Of course, if you're new to the channel, what we do here is go game by game, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team had in their series. We'll talk about player of the game, done of the game, and at the end of the series, I will give a player of the series, just kind of giving my thoughts, a little bit of a rundown, and kind of a form check, if you will, on how these teams are doing. Of course, at the end of the video, I will also be giving predictions on tomorrow's series, so stick around for that. But right now, it's time to get into our preview of today's series, which of course is a matchup between the number 1 seed from the LPL in JD Gaming and the number 2 seed from the LCK in T1. I cover both of these regions all year long, and these really have been the two teams that I've highlighted over the course of the entire year as being the two best teams in the entire world. T1, for a large portion of spring, felt like easily the best team in the world. They were dominating the LCK, which I think a lot of people consider to be one of the deeper regions in the world, and obviously I would agree with that for the most part. And I think T1 just kind of fumbled the bag in the finals. There's really no other way to put it. They weren't able to get over Gen G in that matchup, but I think over the course of the year, they did kind of prove that, for the most part, I think a lot of people considered them the better team going into this tournament, and they proved that, being able to take down Gen G in the previous round to be able to get here in the first place. But for JD Gaming on the other side, this is a team that never once dropped from number 1 in my power rankings across the entire LPL split. Not because they didn't have their problems and their down games, because they absolutely did, but even in the times where they looked bad, they still looked like a team that was talented enough to be able to turn it around, and I thought for the most part that they were going to be able to figure it out, and obviously they've been able to figure it out. They're clearly the best team to come out of China in 2023, at least in the spring split, and, with a core of Kanavi, Knight, Ruler, 369 and missing as well, it's not really that hard to see why. They might be the most talented team in the world, but T1 is really the only other team that's going to be able to give them a run for their money in that respect. They're both really good at every part of the game, and so not a lot of stylistic things to throw out here. JDG definitely likes to win a little bit earlier. They like quick victories. It's what they kind of go for, but T1 is certainly no stranger to winning early or late, and so both of these teams, stylistically match up into each other interestingly. Of course, if you want to know my thoughts, I predicted T1 to go over in the upper bracket version of the series. However, I have T1 making it to grand finals as well in my bracket prediction, and I have JDG going over in grand finals. I think this should go to 5 games. These two teams are pretty inseparable, in my opinion. They're two of the best teams in the world, and it really is just going to be about who is able to field the better team on today. But with that preview being said, it's time to jump into the action, and so let's go ahead and do it. If we're going to go game by game, that means we got to start with game number 1, and the winner of game number 1 was JD Gaming. They are able to take the first game in this series. They're able to really put themselves in a nice advantageous state. Game 1, I think, is almost underrated in the grand scheme of best of 5s. I think a lot of people see game 1 as a game you can lose. You can put yourself in a little bit of a hole, but momentum, especially in a series where two teams are as close as these two are, I think it's going to be pretty massive, and the confidence to be able to move on with the strategy that you played here in this first game, I think is also going to be big. T1 definitely taking a much more aggressive comp, going for the Kindred in the jungle, going for the Nautilus in the mid lane. They want to try to get a lot of these picks. They want to try to generate a game state where this Aphelios and this Kindred are really the two big threats in front-to-back team fights. And then for JDG on the other side, a lot more flexibility, a lot more options. Obviously, you still got the hyper carry in Jinx, but you're going for something like the Annie, which can both enable and, carry the game on her own. Kanavi has been really adept at the Wukong, so draft-wise, obviously both teams are at the point where they can probably draft most of anything and probably get away with it, but let's go ahead and talk about how we ended up getting there with the JDG win, because 28 minutes, I think, undersells what this game, or how close this game actually was for a lot of it. T1 actually walk out of the early game with what I would consider to be a pretty solid lead in this one. First Blood does go over to the side of JD Gaming. Owner goes for a really aggressive invade on the Kindred. He thinks he's going to be able to blow Kanavi up before he's really able to get help, but Knight rotates incredibly quickly. He's able to stun up the Kindred, and they're able to pick up that First Blood, but T1 answers relatively fantastically with a 4-man top lane onto 369. They land the dive. They got the Herald a little bit before this. They drop Herald. They get first tower. They get a ridiculous amount of gold from this, and basically completely fund their entire early game through this one singular play, because almost everybody on the map is getting gold because of this, which is really good for T1. You want to be able to generate that early lead, because when you're looking at Kindred and Aphelios, if you're going into the mid game with them being a little bit more aggressive, that's a really good spot to be in. You've got a lot of peel here, obviously with Nautilus, but with Thresh, with Cassante, you've got a lot of ways to keep them healthy if you're going into the mid game for the team fights. I actually really like the situation that they put themselves in. Unfortunately, though, they have to trade something for it, and in the early game, a lot of it was Drakes. JDG was just getting a lot of the Drakes basically for free because T1 was getting the Herald basically for free. That was kind of the trade that both sides wanted to go for, and, obviously we'll see how that goes down the line. JDG continue to stay active in the mid game. They end up with a lot of picks, a couple of Flash Tibbers that are massive for Knight. He continues to be really good on this Annie. There aren't a lot of players who really play this champion at like a crazy high level, but Knight's definitely one of them. Not that he plays anything at a low level, he's just an incredibly good player, and I've sung the praises of him for, 2 years now. I called him the best player in the world going into Worlds last year. That definitely got me some controversy, but I'm glad to see he's finally kind of living up to that on an international stage. T1 continue to try and stay, in control. They try to continue to pressure JDG on this side of the map, but a lot of poor engages coming out from the side of T1 actually leads towards JDG getting a couple of really nice fights in the mid lane, which reestablishes their lead. Faker in particular just going in a little bit too often on the Nautilus, hitting hooks that maybe he didn't expect to hit, and, going into situations that aren't necessarily all that ideal. JDG is able to kind of turn that mid game back into their favor, and then really where things get difficult for T1 to be able to come back is Knight continuously making a lot of plays. He kills Carrier right before the soul fight, and that leads into JDG just kind of dominating it. Ruler, by the way, is just kind of popping off at the back end of a lot of these fights on the Jinx. His positioning's great, but a lot of credit to Missing. We'll give him a lot of credit as this segment goes on, but he was fantastic with the peel this entire game, and this fight is really where things start to turn bad for T1. Not only do JDG get soul, but because of the pressure that they get from getting Ocean Soul, they're able to basically get a free Baron off of this as well, and it's looking pretty doomed for T1 at this point. There's one final engage in the bot lane after JDG starts sieging, and again, it's initiated by Faker's Nautilus, which just doesn't go in favor of T1. JDG pretty cleanly, I would say, counter-engage. Kanavi in particular with a really good Wukong knock-up, and JDG's able to take the fight easily and end the game. It's just good stuff, really clean stuff overall from JDG, even if the early game wasn't perfect per se. Like, they had a couple of errors. They were able to rebound by making a lot of really aggressive, really heads-up plays. Mostly my player of the game in Knight, in the mid lane. This Annie was spectacular. I mean, every single time he dropped ultimate, it felt like he was hitting 1, 2, or 3 important targets in every single fight. And that can win you the game, basically, by itself. It's not that Annie does little damage either. Obviously, the utility you get from the stun is massive, but she can still be a pseudo carry for this team, and she kind of was. Kanavi was really good in this game, especially towards the back half with the knockups, but a lot of people are also going to look at Ruler and Missing in the bot lane. I thought both of them were also pretty fantastic here. Missing in particular, what a Braum game. I mean, this is like best support in the world levels of Braum that we saw in this one, and going up against a player like Carrier, who a lot of people, me included, considered the best player in the world in spring. It's just really cool to see Missing, quite frankly, just be the better support here in game number 1. Ruler did everything he needed to do to pop off. 369 didn't have a big impact, but he didn't really need to. He got set behind in the early game, and he allowed the rest of his team to kind of carry him to a win, and that sometimes is a really good trait to have. As for T1 on the other side, just a couple of really, really bad plays. The two players that I want to point out, not really team fighting all that well towards the back half of the game. Obviously, my dud of the game, Faker, who just continued to go in on the Nautilus. This can be the problem with the pick in the mid lane, is sometimes you don't really have a lot to do if you're really far behind, right? You're just going to go in and die really quickly, and sometimes you can bait the rest of your team into some poor engages, and unfortunately, that was kind of the role that Faker had. This was one of his worst games at the tournament up until this point. I'm not expecting it to continue, but certainly something to point out. And then Owner in the jungle on the Kindred was really aggravating aggro in the early game, like I said, but being put behind this Wukong was actually a major problem for Owner. He never really got to do anything in team fights, mostly because if the enemy team is competent enough to be able to just perma-CC the Kindred, she's never going to be able to press the ultimate button for her to be able to actually survive any of these fights. Her short range is a massive problem against a comp with an Annie and a Wukong and things like that, and so really not a lot that Owner could do. This really was a pretty big mid-jungle gap in this game, and that's not really what I expected to say going into the series. Yes, Kanavi and Knight are really good, but Owner and Faker have been phenomenal as well, and, you know, game number 1 definitely going in favor of JDG in that regard, but T1 definitely still has a lot of firepower to be able to answer with. This team is still really good. I'm not counting them out by any means, but JDG is going to be really happy with that game 1 win. If they can get a game 2 win and put themselves 1 win away from being able to knock out T1 in upper bracket, that's going to be fantastic. If you're T1, you've got to avoid that at all costs. You don't want to have to win 3 games in a row against this incredibly tough JDG team. So who's going to be able to take game 2? Well, we'll find out right now, because the winner of game number 2 was T1. They are able to take game number 2. They're able to tie up this series at 1 apiece, and what a wild game this was. I mean, just not what you would think it would be basically at all. This was a 24-minute win for T1, but if I just told you that, you would have thought T1 dominated the whole game. That was certainly not what happened. We got a pretty classic LCK finish here, which is funny considering JD Gaming on the other side, but a pretty classic LCK finish where both teams were kind of posturing the whole game. A couple of fights here and there, but really not a lot of action until one major fight happens in the end game, and then boop, game over. Not really a lot of counterplay opportunities, and a very, very decisive call from T1 to be able to end at 24 minutes, but, you know, they're able to walk away with the win, and that's really all that matters in the end. So let's go ahead and talk about how they ended up getting there. We actually had a crazy level 1 play where it was kind of level 1. Both junglers were level 2, but everybody else in the fight was level 1. It ended up being a 4v4 that both teams just kind of trade over a kill. Both junglers end up going down. Both mids end up picking up the kill, which is really, really good. And then they just decide to trade in the mid lane. Knight goes super aggro to get Faker under tower, and he does pick up the kill, but he dies to tower in return. And so a pretty wild level 1 from both teams. Both mids gaining 2 kills at level 1 is certainly going to expedite how they are going to be able to play around the map, but outside of that, the early game is still kind of aggressive. It's not even just that one play, a big 2v2 topside that T1 does eventually win with Faker roaming up on the Tristana to turn it into a 3v2 and a 2-for-0 kill. Zeus plays this fight incredibly well on the Ornn. But JDG does answer with a pretty perfect 4-man dive bot lane to be able to pick up not only 2 kills, but also the Drake on top of that. And so both teams kind of getting things, neither really separating themselves a ton in the early game. And then when we get to the mid game, it's really just, again, a lot of posturing. There really isn't a better way to say it. There was one big fight in the mid lane where Knight just plays out of his mind on the Cassio. He completely turns it. It looks really good for T1 at first, but Knight plays it incredibly well to be able to turn it in favor of JDG. And that gives them the lead. They're able to control the dragons from that point onwards in the game, but like I said, it only takes one fight for a team like T1 to be able to end, and that's what happens. A lot of the late game, or at least the early part of the late game, is just posturing here. Eventually, Zeus on the Ornn does teleport into a ward right behind JDG. He goes for this fantastic Ornn ult play, which is really, really solid. It gives them a lot of setup. At first, it looks like Knight is actually going to turn it again with a really good disengage, but Faker actually plays this perfectly. He jumps right in on top of the enemy team. He does a ridiculous amount of damage to trade his life, and then Guma can just clean up. And from that point onwards, T1's like, wait, it's 24 minutes. We're not going to go Baron. We're just going to end the game. And they do. They run it down mid. And even though it's really close, they only end up with 2 members surviving in the end. They are able to end the game at 24 minutes. Pretty wild stuff here coming out from both teams, but it was a lot of fun to watch. Player of the game for me is going to go to Gumayushi just because of that final fight, where he really did play fantastic. Of course, Faker in that same vein also, I think, had a really good game. A big bounce back from that poor game 1 on the Nautilus from him, but those were the 2 players that I think stood out the most. I thought Zeus obviously was definitely someone who you got drawn to in a lot of the highlights because of that 2v2 top kill where his knockup was absolutely huge, and being able to get both of those, and also the teleport at the end of the game that ended up initiating the game-winning fight. But I think a lot of people are going to sleep on how good Keria was in this game on the Rakan. Basically a perfect Rakan game, a lot of fantastic knockups, a lot of fantastic engages and initiations, and that's really all you're looking for from that champion. That final fight was perfectly played by everybody on the side of T1, and there really isn't a lot of notes, a lot of complaints that you can give them. Gumayushi gets it because he did get a quadra kill in that fight, and honestly, his aggressive play was really why they were able to clean up, but Faker, again, was the one who really, Faker, Zeus, and Keria were the ones who really kind of initiated it. Owner was the only one I wasn't really considering here, not because he played bad, but really just because he didn't have any sort of standout plays in this game. As for JDG on the other side, Knight continues to be a huge positive piece for this team. He had another really good game, this time on the Cassiopeia. Unfortunately, it just wasn't going to be enough. I actually did have to give out a dud of the game. That's how this channel works. I didn't really have a player on the team that I wanted to give out dud of the game to. Nobody really played all that bad. I think you could realistically give it to, I guess, either 369 or Kanavi. They were both, like, equally meh in this game, but neither really made any sort of major errors. They both just lost the 2v2 on the top side, and that was really the only negative play for JDG up until the final fight, which was just kind of a team gap. It was just T1 playing the fight a little bit better. So I gave it to 369 on the Scion because he was just taking a lot of damage at the beginning of fights, but that's his job. That's what he's supposed to do. And then Kanavi on the same front was just not engaging a whole lot. Like, again, you could give it to either. I don't think either played bad, but they were the two that probably stood out, making negative plays for the team. But again, Knight was really good. Ruler and Missing didn't really make any mistakes. They just kind of got outplayed towards the back half of this game, which, it's not great, but it's not bad either. I mean, it's freaking Gumayushi, Keria, Faker, right? Like, you're not going to be able to outplay them every single team fight. So overall, not an awful loss for JDG, but certainly not the situation that you wanted to drop to in 1-1 in this series. I think you probably wanted to go up to at least secure yourself a much better, look here, and especially losing that momentum from game 1. It was a super fun game on the side of T1, but JDG's probably going to want to go into game 3 and try and regain that momentum. They've actually shown a lot of good things this series. Knight has really been on the top of his game, and that's really good to see against a really good opponent in T1. Hopefully he can keep that up, but for T1, maybe this is the kind of spark you need to generate some momentum. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to win a lot of games the way that you won this one, but you showed that you were able to come back in a lot of the late game. We talked about that a bit earlier. JDG, definitely a little bit more of an early game team that likes to focus on being able to generate individual leads in particular, but it's not like they're awful in the late game. It's just T1's really good in the late game. That could be something that T1 continues to try to capitalize on, but are they going to be able to do it? Who's going to be able to take control of this series with a win in game number 3? You could argue this is, the most important game of the entire series to be able to swing it in your favor. So who's going to be able to take it? Well, the winner of game number 3 was T1. They are able to take game number 3. They're able to go up into this series 2-1. And golly, I can't believe they did it again. They did it again. 2 games in a row where it's like, things are moving. Oh, a team fight. Oh, the game's over. And I can't believe it. Like, how do they keep getting away with this? How is this allowed in the game of League of Legends? It's just absurd for T1 to have the kind of confidence to know that they can end on plays like this, but really, I mean, credit to them. They play a lot of these fights so perfectly that they're able to pick up aces. They're able to run it down mid with all 5 members because they're trading 5 for 0, and they're able to end the game off of them. It just goes to show you the skill that they're able to execute a lot of their team fight plans on. But for JDG, you've got to feel so tilted out of your mind with how some of these games ended up going. I mean, it really felt like you had control of game 2. Game 3, a little less so. You were going for some more miracle plays, but at the end of the day, still, you weren't in a bad spot in either of these games, and all it took was one fight for you to be knocked down in this series 2-1, 1 game away from being pushed down to the lower bracket. Definitely frustrating, but let's go ahead and talk about how we ended up getting there. Early game, again, for the 3rd game in a row, was relatively even. Neither team really separating themselves all that much. JDG was definitely a little bit more aggressive with the plays that they were making. First Blood was very strange. Missing was way out of position. He was way too far forward. He had to flash over the wall. Guma ends up flash following him, and it looks like it's going to be a pretty free First Blood for the Jinx. However, JDG's right there to be able to kind of surprise the Jinx, and, he goes over. He ends up getting killed for First Blood. Faker ends up saving it by being able to ult Missing over the wall to be able to pick it up, obviously with Cassante, but it's a really weird play in general, just not necessarily how I expected this game to go, but JDG aren't going to be afraid to continue to try to make plays just because that one wasn't exactly perfect, even though they are still able to pick up the First Blood. Kanavi ends up stealing Herald in a pretty massive fight, and JDG, I would say, walk out of that fight with a win, even if T1 are able to trade one back on the Gwen, which is a pretty good champion to be able to get fed in this particular team comp. Zeus gets caught in River, but they end up having to trade Kanavi for it as well. Just a lot of plays that are relatively back and forth. JDG most of the time initiating and quite frankly getting the better of it slightly, but certainly not enough to be able to move this game in one direction or the other. I would say they held control of the map, but Gold was basically even the entire early game, and so definitely neither side kind of dominating it, I would say. Faker does try to solo kill Knight in the mid lane, which obviously as a Cassante, he's just able to solo kill anybody if they step up a little too far, and honestly, it looks like he's going to be able to just because his champion is absolutely nuts. Guma ends up coming in, and unfortunately for them, Knight is really good, and he ends up sidestepping all of the damage that's being put out by these two, and so he ends up living. I usually don't talk about failed ganks, but that one was really well played by Knight, so I figured it was worth pointing out. And then there's a pretty massive Herald fight, which again, does go in favor of JD Gaming. They're actually able to win the mid game for a third straight game, and put themselves in a pretty comfortable position going into the back half. Now, the gold lead, again, is really not that big. It's like 500 gold. It's just JDG has a lot of the pressure on the map at the current moment. Unfortunately, where it all kind of goes wrong is a pretty poorly timed flank from Knight. It's a teleport onto the backline. He obviously saw what Zeus was going for at the end of game number 2, and he tried to do it himself. Unfortunately, he didn't have flash up, so he was just kind of a sitting duck. He's able to get the ultimate off, and it is a good stun, and he's able to stopwatch, but there's a Jinx on the enemy team, so he gets Chompers thrown down on him, and he just dies coming out of that basically immediately, and then T1 are able to turn that. Ruler tries to turn the fight in favor of JDG. It's not like a complete stomp in favor of T1, but it's still a massive fight for them that allows them to get basically their first lead of the entire game. And then eventually there's the final fight of the game where Knight gets perma-CC'd by T1 and taken down almost instantly, and then Keria does a fantastic job of peeling for Gumayusi, peeling Kanavi in particular on Gumayusi to be able to win the fight 5-0 and just run it down mid and end again at 23 minutes, even though they had only gotten their first lead like maybe 3 minutes ago. It's actually astounding that this is how games are working out at MSI or for T1 in particular at this tournament, but there we are. Player of the game for me is actually going to go to Keria. I thought he was fantastic on the Nautilus. Obviously, Faker didn't look particularly great on this pick in game number 1, but Keria is just a different beast. Really what he was used mostly for in this game, which Faker didn't do, was peel. He was really on the backline, just making sure that Gumayusi had a lot of the opportunities to deal the damage that he needed to, and without Keria, this game is not winnable for T1. It really is the case. If he's not on the backline, sitting there making sure that the Jinx is able to free fire, like, there is just simply no way that they win these team fights, because Kanavi is able to jump on that backline and really cause a lot of problems, and Ruler was dealing some damage in these fights, and so good on Keria to be able to be that peel, but credit to Guma for being able to capitalize on that peel. Faker was also good on the Cassante. I think his scoreline definitely doesn't tell you how impactful he was in this game. Zeus, Owner were also fine, but in my opinion, Keria and Faker were probably the two main people that I focused on the entire game, and then Gumayusi was kind of the recipient of a lot of that good play. And then for JDG on the other side, a couple of really good plays, a couple of bad plays. Knight is still going to be their focal point player, both for good and for bad here in game number 3. He still is making a lot of the positive plays that JDG have in order to, keep them in a really good spot in these games, but that teleport is what a lot of people are going to look at, and the fact that he got CC chained out in the final fight, meaning that he really couldn't output a lot of damage. He couldn't ult, he couldn't flash, he couldn't do any of that stuff. People are going to look at that and be like, Knight's real bad. That's not Knight's fault. The problem is that he is Annie, and his Aphelios isn't really taking over the game. His Xin Zhao isn't able to get on the backline. Like, yes, obviously, it's great for him to be able to affect a lot of these fights, but when you're looking at this comp in particular and saying the Annie has to be the one to win the team fight, something has gone horribly wrong. And so I'm not going to blame Knight. My dud of the game is going to go to Kanavi because he was basically useless this entire game. Not only did Xin Zhao not really do anything in the early game besides steal that Herald, he really didn't do a lot in the late game either. His entire role on this team is to be able to jump on the Jinx, and he never really got the opportunity to because of the good peel from T1. And so, where Knight had good plays and bad plays, it really didn't feel like Kanavi had any sort of good plays in this game. Again, not really a player diff, more so just an impact diff because of what ended up happening in the game. But JDG, you're now down 1-2. You are one game away from moving down to lower bracket, and you have never gone into the late game without a lead. That's how crazy this series has been up until this point. Obviously, games 4 and 5 are must-wins for you in this series to be able to stay alive, but T1 is looking fantastic going into the second half of this series. They're decisive. They know how to win a lot of these team fights, and they really don't need a huge lead to be able to start taking over the game. It's going to be a very big mountain to climb. You got to win 2 in a row against this very good and very confident T1 team right now, but JDG is definitely talented enough to be able to get it done, but it's got to start here in game number 4. So are they going to be able to do it, or is T1 going to be able to close it out after that game 1 loss? Well, the winner of game number 4 was JD Gaming. They are able to take game number 4. They're able to keep this series alive by tying it up at 2 apiece. And they're sending us to a Silver Scrapes game number 5. And I, for one, am incredibly excited about that. These two teams have been playing each other incredibly well across this series up until this point. I think JDG has clearly proven, quite frankly, that they're the better early game team, but no lead is safe when you are going up against T1. Yes, JDG was able to take this one, but you never really know when that T1 team is going to be able to strike. I'm incredibly excited for that. But let's talk about Game 4. Let's not get overzealous. Let's not jump to conclusions. We got a full Game 4 to end up talking about here. So what ended up happening? How did JDG end up winning it? Well, it was a pretty convincing win, quite frankly. This was probably the most dominant game of the series. This and game number 1, obviously, both come to mind as pretty good JDG wins across this series up till this point, but it continues to be the same members of the team that continue to push them forward. Jungle mid has been fantastic for JDG in this series up until this point. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Another wild level 1 for both of these teams, this time being mid lane. It's a nice level 1 gank coming out from Kanavi to actually be able to pick up Faker. Owner looks like he tries to save the play, but he ends up being in a lot of danger basically because of it as well. But then JDG stick around just a little bit too long. Kanavi wants to steal away basically everything on Owner's side of the map, which I do understand. You want to try and gain that jungle advantage, but Knight's put in a pretty precarious situation because of it once Faker gets back into lane, and so Knight ends up trading his life for the play, but it still is, I would say, relatively in favor of JDG. Not only are they getting the first blood gold from that play, but they also are getting a lot of Owner's jungle, and that's, a price that you really aren't going to have to pay if you are JDG, and so that's really good stuff coming out, I would say, from them overall, although the rest of the early game is still kind of explosive. It's not nearly as, back and forth. It definitely becomes a little bit more one-sided in favor of JDG. They continue to get picks onto this Kindred, which is, quite frankly, a liability. Even after level 6, the CC chain coming out from the Annie and the Wukong just continues to make Kindred's life incredibly difficult. She really doesn't ever even get to press the ultimate button. She's basically just fodder the entirety of the early game, whether that be, a dragon fight, which, it was there, whether it be at Second Herald, which it was there. There's never really a lot of situations where the Kindred is actually coming in clutch. The range is just too low. And especially going into something like Annie, Kindred's never really going to be able to do anything about that unless she does get a ton of marks and she gets the range to be able to actually, kite out the Annie. But, if you get CC chained to death and you're not able to press R, that's going to be a little bit of a problem. JDG continue to kind of accelerate the mid game, and they're getting a lot of the objectives because of their jungle control. And I'll say, it's not just Knight that's making a lot of these plays. As good as the Annie is and as good as Knight was this game, it's also Kanavi in the jungle who really was fantastic across this entire game. He continued to play really well. JDG continued to win fights in the, late mid game, I would say, mostly because of jungle mid, and there really isn't a lot that T1 can do about it. Honestly, it looks like they found a really good fight at third Drake, but they're just not able to capitalize. Ruler actually dies instantly. It's a really good pick on the side of T1, and you're thinking, okay, a 4v5 for T1 without the Aphelios, that's got to be a pretty good situation, but jungle mid just continues to be too much of a problem. Somehow the Wukong Annie are able to be enough to win the 4v5 in favor of the 4, which is never really what you want to see if you're T1. Maybe the teamfight tactics aren't exactly going to work in this particular game, but just really good stuff coming out from jungle mid. Eventually, JDG do get Baron. They get a few more picks. Faker gets caught in jungle, but JDG can't quite end on the base race. They're just, not the base race, just running into the base with Baron buff. They end up taking all the inhibitors, but eventually Guma's just too far forward. He ends up getting caught. He dies for it, and then JDG feel pretty comfortable going into the base and ending the game off of that. But overall, just another really solid game for JDG. They continue, quite frankly, to look like the better team in this series. I know T1 has been able to win more games. Well, I guess the same amount of games now that Game 4 is done up until this point, but T1's wins weren't exactly the most dominant games in existence. They were able to win the one fight, but you never really know how those games go if they go just a little bit longer. And so to see JDG kind of dominate the early game in this one and really transition that into a pretty clean victory, it's just a good sign, especially going into a game number 5 where you're going to want a lot of confidence, where you're going to want a lot of momentum. In my opinion, JDG has the confidence and the momentum in this series up until this point. Player of the game is going to be Kanavi for me in the jungle on this Wukong. A lot of damage coming out from this Wukong. Usually this champion doesn't do nearly this much, but honestly, the Aphelios was good. He just wasn't that, takeover kind of threat in a lot of these team fights. That role was kind of secured for the Wukong, which is really impressive stuff. Kanavi was, I don't want to say the weak link of JD Gaming, because that's very disrespectful to what he was over the course of the year, but when you have a super team like this, somebody has to take a step back in terms of resources, and that definitely was Kanavi over the course of this year. He was not the same guy who had Yagao as his mid laner last year and pumped a lot of resources into him. He was someone who was going to play for the rest of his team, and honestly, going into this tournament, I didn't expect to be saying his name nearly as much as Knight or Ruler, or even 369 in terms of, kind of carry potential, but he was awesome in this game. He's been really good in this series so far. If you give him his Wukong, he's going to be able to punish you for it, and so another really good game from him, but Knight continues to be unreal on the Annie. He's been fantastic, not only this series, but the entire tournament. He will continue to not get the respect that he deserves as a player because for some reason or another, everybody seems to want to hate on Knight, and I don't agree with it. He's one of the best players in the world, basically no question. I think he's very close to that. Ruler and Missing are fantastic, but, Kanavi and Knight, I think, have developed a really nice synergy in the jungle mid, and that really took over here. If those two continue to play at this level, T1's going to be in trouble because they're playing really well across the series so far. Ruler and Missing are still really good. Missing, in particular, I thought had a good game on the Rakan, and 369, again, was fine on the Gragas. This really has not been a top lane focused series, and I think that's been to the benefit of JDG. As for T1 on the other side, done of the game's going to go to Owner on this Kindred. The Kindred pick is just not working. It's not something I expect them to go back to for the Game 5. Certainly not the only player on the team that feels a little bit lost on the champion that they're currently playing, but, for as good as Owner is, and, I assume the Kindred pick is absolutely working in scrims, it just doesn't seem to be working on stage when those aggressive plays might be a little bit more tempered. It very much feels like if he doesn't get super far ahead, he's just not going to be able to actually deal with the Annie and the Wukong in the late game. He barely got to press R this game. And then Faker is also just not very good at Nautilus. I don't really want to see him on this champion anymore. A lot of what unlocked T1 over the course of this year was investing a bit more into the mid lane. I know that obviously you want to invest in Aguma because he's having a really good tournament, and, he did get caught towards the back half of the game, but he was still pretty good in this one. I don't think the way to do that is by putting Faker on Nautilus. I think maybe trying to get the Annie for yourselves. I know it's not his best pick in the entire universe, but it's still probably going to be better than what he's showing off on this Nautilus pick. Zeus was fine on the Malphite, a really good TP in the bot lane to try to make a play, and it did end up working. They just weren't able to capitalize on it. And then Guma and Carrier have been fine. They've been the best players on the team, not only in this series, but in this whole tournament. So, now we're tied up at 2 apiece. It definitely is in favor of JDG momentum-wise, but T1's one of those teams that you always have to be afraid of going into a game number 5. They don't exactly have the best track record when it comes to that, but they just snapped their streak last series against Gen G. Can they continue that now? Can they make a new streak by beating JDG in this game number 5? Or is JDG going to prove that World Semis was a long time ago and these are two very different teams? Well, we're going to find out right now because the winner of game number 5 was JD Gaming. They are able to take game number 5. They're able to close out this series with a little bit of a comeback, and they really do show in this series that right now they are the best team in the world. Obviously, this isn't potentially the last time that we see these two teams face off against each other, and it's certainly not going to be the last time JDG has to defend that crown, but it is really hard to say anything else after how this series ended up going down. A really good showing from both teams, but a couple of very costly mistakes coming out from a couple of members of T1 that end up costing them, as costly mistakes tend to do, and JDG not the kind of team to let those go unpunished. And so, really, really fun game. Easily the most fun game of the entire series. Game 5s between two of the best teams in the world on an international stage like MSI are just the absolute best. It's what we do this for as fans here, and so really, really awesome stuff. Let's go ahead and get into what ended up happening in this game because a lot happened, and I don't want to skip over too much, but this was a really fun one to watch. I recommend you go watch it yourself if you haven't. The stakes of this game were incredibly high, and boy did both teams deliver. It was a very close early game, but JDG come out slightly on top, I would say, in the grand scheme of things. It certainly wasn't a definite. Another really wild early game, I would say, for a lot of the teams. Knight ends up getting first blood on a gank mid, which is really good for the Sylas to really accelerate that gameplay. Also, really like the Sylas R5 here. I think this was a fantastic pick on the side of JDG, and I think that there are a lot of opportunities for him to get use out of those stolen ultimates this game. Trust me, we will be talking about them, but, a pretty close early game. 369 ends up trading on the top side. He ends up dying to a gank top, and then a pretty close fight at Second Herald. I would say a super close fight even. That does go the way of JDG, but I would say only barely. T1 really get a lot out of this as well. And so, again, for probably the 5th game in a row, really with the exception of game number 4, there really isn't this giant gap between any of the teams when it comes to the early game. Both teams really taking it not slow because there is action, but a lot of trades. A lot of, oh, I get something on this side of the map, and so I have to give up something on the other side of the map, and no fights really going in the direction of one team or the other. A lot of really neutral exchanges. I will say, T1 does start to separate themselves quite a bit in the mid game, which is not really what we've seen from this team up until this point. JDG have actually kind of dominated the mid game across this series up until game number 5, but this was really the best mid game that T1 had. A big Baron play that really puts them in a really good driver's position, I would say, for them to be able to pick up that first Baron, and they transition that into denying the soul with a another really good fight. And by this point, T1 is up like 5k gold. They're actually looking really good in this game. Gumayusi has gold. Zeus in particular has a lot of gold, and Keria is playing really well on the Lulu, keeping everybody alive that needs to stay alive. And so really all you have to do now is not make a super egregious error towards the back half of the game, and you're probably going to be fine. But unfortunately, T1 makes a super egregious error towards the back half of the game, and JDG, like I said earlier, is just not going to let that slide. T1 sticks around right before second Baron. They really want to try to contest this. They know JDG is going to be in the area, but they're down a man. They don't have someone there, and so you're sitting there 4v5 with JDG walking in, and Faker decides to initiate on the Nautilus, and the fight completely goes against T1. They get absolutely demolished. JDG gets Baron off of the play, and from that moment on, JDG has full control of the rest of the game. I can't even begin to tell you what could have been going through Faker's head on this Nautilus, but it is incredibly, incredibly out of character for a player like Faker to make a mistake as bad as this one was. This was a game-losing mistake from the Nautilus. Not that it was secured by any means, the game that is, but this really put them in a bad spot, and it's certainly not something you would expect from a player of Faker's caliber, but you know, it ends up happening. JDG end up getting that lead. T1 go for a final engage as JDG try to siege down the mid lane. It feels like they have some sort of flank onto Ruler on the back line, who, by the way, has been doing a ridiculous amount of the heavy lifting for JDG throughout the entirety of this game number 5. It feels like they finally have a way on top of him with a flank on the back line, but he hasn't used any sums. Basically, the entire game, his positioning and his peel have basically been perfect throughout the entire game, and so he's able to flash out of danger, he's able to reposition, he's able to deal a lot of damage, and JDG are able to take the fight and also the game, as well as the series. So big stuff from JD Gaming, winning this one, moving on to grand finals here at MSI. They're going to be in finals, obviously. Who they play will still be determined, but a fantastic series from JDG. There really is no other way to put it. Ruler's going to get my player of the game for game number 5. He really was the one driving a lot of the action for JDG. A couple of moments where Kanavi was great, a couple of moments where Knight was great. 369 is a phenomenal team fighter. He really is. Just watching him in team fights is an absolute joy to watch, but this game really was about Ruler on the Jinx. He was dealing so much damage, and his positioning was practically perfect, even in a lot of these super chaotic scrambles. It's just incredibly impressive. He's still the best AD carry in the world, as far as I'm concerned, and he proved that again in this series. But player of the series as a whole, for me, is actually going to go to Knight in the mid lane. I thought he was the most consistent member of JDG across this entire series. Talked about him a lot in their wins. I even talked about him a bit in their losses. I think realistically, this should go to either Knight or Kanavi. I can't really determine which one was significantly better. If you want to give it to Kanavi, I totally understand. If you want to give it to Knight, I totally understand. Both of them were really the big difference makers, I would say, across this whole series, and both of them were really good in game number 5 as well. Missing had a good series as well, even if there were a couple of Rakan plays in this game that got him in a little bit of trouble. And 369 had a great game on Gragas. I mean, watching him team fight is just super fun. You know, you can make an argument he's the best top laner in the world, and I think this game would definitely be proof to back that up. So overall, JDG continued to look really, really good. As for T1 on the other side, a frustrating way to lose the series, but I'm going to be entirely honest, and maybe T1 fans are going to get on me for this because I know that they're very vocal and they like to be mad at me in my comment section, or at least that's what history has told me, but they really weren't in control of this series almost at all. I know they were up 2-1, but those 2 games that they won were very strange wins. They, you know, weren't winning in the mid game. They won one team fight and they were able to end off of them. Great macro and micro, honestly, from T1 to be able to win fights as hard as they did and to be able to translate those into wins. But when you're looking at, you know, dominance over the course of this series, JDG really had their number, in my opinion, when it came to a lot of that. I think T1 definitely has a lot of building left to do. Faker had a very uncharacteristically bad series. 3 bad games of Nautilus, if we're being entirely honest. Everything else was pretty good, but I just don't want to see him on that pick anymore. I really don't want to see that come out. Not a lot of enabling to do here. Guma had a decent series. Keria is really freaking good, and I thought Zeus was honestly pretty good this series as well, but jungle mid was just a little bit too much of an anchor, pun entirely intended, to be able to carry them across the finish line, and that really was the case. I didn't expect jungle mid to really be the avenue where T1 was brought down in this series, but that ended up being the case. Obviously, I have faith that these players are going to be able to rebound, but it really was not a good series for those 2, in particular on the Kindred, on the Nautilus. You know, really not a lot of good plays and active plays made by them. Again, I have faith that they're going to be able to figure it out, but they're going to have to do it now in the lower bracket. They're going to be facing the winner of tomorrow's series between Genji and Billy Gaming. Certainly going to be an intriguing matchup, basically no matter who they end up facing, but for T1, they've got a lot of time to get their confidence back together. They were one win away from being able to move on to finals. We're going to have to see if that prophecy is meant to be fulfilled. But for JDG on the other side, they're the best team in the world. Like I said, they now move on to grand finals, and I really don't think that there are a lot of teams, not only that can match them in terms of talent and in terms of, player skill, but even in terms of macro. This team basically has everything. Their early game dominance is parallel to almost no one in the entire world, and their mid game is incredibly explosive. If they can get a little bit more consistent with winning some fights at the beginning of the end game, they're going to be one of the most dominant teams we've ever seen in the history of League of Legends. All right, but that is going to do it for my MSI Upper Bracket Finals overview and analysis. I really do hope you guys enjoyed the video. Up on the screen is the bracket. Of course, JDG now in finals. T1 going to be facing the winner of tomorrow's series between Bilibili Gaming and Gen G. Of course, I want to know what you guys thought of today's series down below. I also want to know what you guys think of tomorrow's series down below. You'll know my predictions if you watched my bracket video. I have Gen G being the better team in this series. I think BLG has shown good moments across this entire tournament so far, but I think Gen G is just a step above them in terms of talent right now, especially the consistency in the mid to late game. Two very contrasting styles, though, so if BLG can get out to a lot of early game leads like they've been known to do in the LPL, I could see a world in which, if you want to snowball that out of control, it's definitely possible, but Gen G, much more controlled, much more fluent, I would say, in being able to close games out. So I have Gen G winning in 4, 3-1 would be my prediction, but if it ended up going to 5, I'm not shocked. If it ended up being in 3, I wouldn't be shocked either. I think Gen G definitely is favored in my opinion. But again, let me know what you guys think down below. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button. It really does mean a lot for the channel. Not only does it let me know that you guys are enjoying the content, it helps get this video out to a lot more people, which obviously I'm really appreciative of. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. We're posting about every single day of MSI action here on this channel, and so if you want daily recaps of everything going on, hit that sub button, hit the bell so you can be notified when those videos go live. Of course, check out the iCard up in the corner where a lot of those videos that I've already posted are, as well as, in-depth breakdowns of a lot of the teams. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.